Sorry guys, I forgot to upload the last class, so I will do it today. Hope you can see my screen now. So today we're going to discuss about the backups and the recovery models. So there are two different topics, the backups and recovery models. So hopefully we can finish recovery models and we can look something about the backups today. So before I proceed with today's session, do you have any questions about last class? And have you tried of creating any logins with users with permissions? Has anyone tried creating a login? I got one response from Ishwar. Okay, all right. The reason I'm always stressing you is when you test it on the next day, so we can take some time and we can discuss on it if you have any questions. Unless we won't do any practice, we won't get questions, so we won't discuss more about it. Thank you for that. So the topics we're going to discuss today is the methods to backup databases. There are quite few methods we have in SQL to back up our databases. And what a backup mean? Do we really require to back up our databases? If that is a question, the answer is yes. Because data is very important for any organization. If any organization lose their data, that means they lose their revenue. So in this real world, nowadays data plays very major role in any business. So as a DBA, we are primarily responsible to back up all our databases proactively so that in case of any disaster happens or if our existing database gets corrupted or any other issues, we are at least be in a position to restore the database using those backups on a different server so that we can bring the database online and we can have our business up and running. So it is much essential for us to take regular backups of our databases. And what all the types of data to be backed up? The first point is methods. What are the different methods we can approach to back up our database? And the next point is what are the types of backups or what types of data we can back up? And the third is the recovery models. Recovery models is something that decides what data need to be written inside your log file. When I say log file, that means it is the LDF file of your database. So when we create a database, two files will get created, right? One is MDF and the other is LDF. So I'm talking about the LDF file. So the recovery model of a database. For every database, there will be a property that is called a recovery model. So that property decides what data need to be written in the LDF file and for how long it should be kept there. So based upon these recovery models, the backups will work. And then last is the recovery methods. What are the different backup strategies we need to follow and how we can restore the databases in case of disaster. So let us try to look at each and every method. The first point is methods to backup data. So we have got three different methods to back up our SQL databases, and it is advised to back up the system databases as well. And if you have remember, while we are discussing about the system databases, I said one point that we cannot back up tempdb database. Backing up the tempdb is not possible. So please do remember that point. It is an interview question. So different methods to back up data is the first method is maintenance wizard. No, I didn't get your question, Danesh. You said it's 5 GB. What is it? You can unmute yourself and you can place your backup capacity. No, we can back up TBs of databases. There is no restriction at SQL. We can back up TBs, hundreds of databases. 100 gigs of database backups. So the first method is we can use maintenance plan wizard, which is again an inbuilt tool. I will take you through those in our next classes. So maintenance wizard is one method to back up the SQL databases, and we can also schedule the maintenance plan to run every night. Usually we back up the databases at non-business hours. Non-business hours in the mean after 7 p.m. in the evening or before 6 a.m. in the morning. So that time is a non-business hours. So no application or any other users will be accessing our databases. So during that time we need to back up our database, because if you try to back up at business hours, at peak hours, then it will put load on your server and your end users will face performance issues. So it is always advised to take backups at nightly, non-business hours. So probably maybe we might need to take our backups maybe night 10 o'clock every day. So if that is a requirement, as a DBA, we are not going to sit in office or in front of the machine to kick off the backups every day night 10 o'clock. It's not possible. There are some cases where you need to back up your databases maybe early in the morning 3 o'clock. So that doesn't mean as a DBA we need to wake up at 3 o'clock and start the backups. You can automate it. That's what you can do using the maintenance plans. Once you create a maintenance plan, it automatically creates a SQL job, and where you can automate that SQL job to run every day at 3 a.m. so that it automatically runs. You don't need to wake up and start the backup job. It automatically starts when a clock ticks 3 a.m. And the second method is using Management Studio. Using Management Studio, you can create a SQL job. The first method is maintenance plan, which is a different method. When you create a maintenance plan, it automatically creates a SQL job. And the second method is you can create a SQL job manually inside the Management Studio, and you can write the T-SQL script inside that job, and you can automate that job to run every day. That's a one way. And the third and the last way is the T-SQL commands, the script. You can still write the T-SQL commands to back up your databases. So today I will probably take you through the second option and the third option. For the first option, maintenance wizard, we have a separate class to discuss about the maintenance plan. So during that time, I will take you through the steps. And prevent loss of data. On what basis, how we plan a backup strategy. When you start marketing your resume, the first or the open-ended question would be, what is your biggest database? What's the biggest database you handle? And if you say some 100 GB, or probably we say the reasonable is 500 GB, the immediate question you would get, what is the backup strategy? What is the backup strategy for that 500 gig database? So we need to explain the strategy. Strategy is nothing but how often you take backup of the database and what type of backups you take. We have different types of backups. So what type of backup you take and how often you take. That's the answer the interviewer might expect from you. So the strategy usually depends upon the application criticality, organization to organization. So basically the strategy depends upon 3 points. One is to minimize data loss. The first is to minimize data loss, and the second is to recover the data loss and to restore data loss with minimal cost and impact. I can give you two scenarios. You have two databases. The first database is very critical, and your management doesn't want it to, in case of disaster, for the first database, the maximum data loss can be accepted around 15 minutes. If a disaster happens, your management is still okay to lose 15 minutes of data for database 1. And for database 2, which is not a critical, so the management is still okay to lose data of 1 day when a disaster happens. So you have got two different requirements for these two databases. For the first database, the management says it is a critical. So in any case of disaster, I can accept only 15 minutes of data loss. But on the second hand, the second database is not critical and a loss of 1 day data can be accepted. So in this case, you have to create two separate backup strategies. So I will you better understand when we talk about the backup types, so that we have to implement different backup types on database 1 and different backup types on database 2 with different schedules to meet the business requirements. So you will be, I mean, you feel better comfort when we talk about the backup types. And the next is a backup regularly. So these are certain recommendations I have pointed out here. So backup frequently if your database is OLTP. OLTP is nothing but online transactional processing. An example is your banking site or any database that belongs to your flight bookings or your shopping websites, which are ongoing. At every second or every couple of seconds a transaction happens. That's we call as the online transactional processing. So for those types of databases where we observe very frequent transactions happening, so for those type of databases we are required to take backups very frequently, and backup less frequently if your database is OLAP. OLAP is online analytical processing, where there are no frequent transactions, but probably once in a day the data modifications happens. So for those type of databases, if you notice that maybe every day at night 10 o'clock the data is getting loaded on this database, then probably you can back up once in a day. And the next is the database recovery models. This is a property of a database, and based upon the property you select, it decides what database backups you can run. I repeat it again. Recovery model is a property of the database that decides what type of backups you can take on the database. So I can quickly show you where you can find this property on the database. You can right click on the user database and go to properties, and on left hand side you see options, select options, and on right hand side you see recovery model. Okay, by default it is set as full. It is because it took all the properties from model database. So we have got the three types of recovery models: full, bulk logged, simple. If I set my database recovery model to be in full, then whatever the transactions you do, like users might insert data or update data or delete data, so all those information will be initially written into the LDF file of the database, and the data will be kept there until you take a log backup. So I repeat it again. If the database is in full recovery model, that means each and every transaction that is happening on this database will be saved in your LDF file, and it will be there until you take log backup. It is a type of a backup. So until you take a log backup, the data will be stored inside your LDF file. So let's assume I have a database, and in the database, as we know, database is of two files, MDF and LDF. So assume my MDF file, let me get a notepad here. I have a database called SampleDB, and in this database I have MDF file and LDF file. Assume my MDF file is of size 5 GB and my LDF file is 100 MB, because data will be stored in the MDF file. LDF file is only used to store the data initially, and upon the transaction commits, it usually flushes. And again, the behavior will depend upon the recovery model, whether the data should automatically be cleared from LDF file or do you need to keep it forever. So that depends upon the recovery model. Now let's assume this is the initial setup. Maybe users inserted around 5 GB of data in this database. Okay, users inserted 5 GB of data in this database. Now the size of the MDF file will go to 10 GB and the size of LDF file will go to 5.1 GB. It is because when user inserted 5 GB of data, that 5 GB of data initially written into the LDF file, and once the transaction committed successfully, then the data will be flushed to the MDF file, and once it flushes the data, still the LDF file will hold that 5 GB of data. That is a behavior of full recovery model. So assume after an hour, user deleted 2 GB of data from the same database. Now the MDF file still shows as 10 GB. For operating system, the MDF file still occupy the space of 10 GB, but inside it 8 GB is used and 2 GB is free for next coming transactions. But for LDF, the behavior will be different. Initially LDF was 5.1 GB, and now what happened? It doesn't matter whether you are running a delete command or insert command or update command. It does only matter how much changes you are doing. So earlier the size was 5.1 GB, right? Now you ran a transaction that is doing 2 GB of data changes. So obviously you notice your LDF file growing to 7.1 GB. LDF file just records the changes. It doesn't matter whether you are running a delete command or update command or insert command. It keeps on writing what are the changes that were happening on your database. So this way, if you keep your database in full recovery model, it keeps on increasing your LDF file, and it is not a good indication. It is not a good indication to keep on increasing our LDF file. And at the same time, for all the production databases and for all the critical databases, we keep a recovery model as full. It is because we don't want to lose a single transaction. In case of disaster happens, our data is still available in the LDF file and we can recover all the data. So if you go back to my previous scenario where I have got two databases, first database, the business accepts of 15 minutes data loss, and for the second database, it's still okay to have 1 day data loss. So in this scenario, for the first database, which is of 15 minutes data loss, I will keep it as full recovery model. Then only it will allow me to take log backups, and using those log backup is nothing but it will back up the content within the LDF file. So it is required when you keep your database in full recovery model, it is required to take frequent log backups. So if you look at in this situation, going forward, this log file, the LDF file, will go on increases, right? So in order to restrict it, having said that, is not a good indication to have the LDF file with huge size. So we need to somewhere restrict the size of the LDF file. So how we can do that? It is with the help of taking frequent log backups. We need to take regular log backups for this database. So what it does, how it impacts, the reason is, or the reason behind how it works is, when you take a log backup, that is when you back up the content within the LDF file, your SQL Server, what it does is all the data that being backed up will be cleared from your LDF file. It will just clear all the data that is being backed up. So in this case, let's say I have taken a backup at this point. So now for same database, MDF file would be the same 10 GB, and for LDF file it still shows as 7.1 GB because it has occupied the space from the OS. So even though you back up or you delete anything within the file, the space will not be reclaimed automatically to OS. So the LDF file still shows as 7.1 GB, but within this LDF file, maybe your 100 MB is used and remaining 7 GB will be free. So the logic we need to understand here is the LDF or the MDF file, when you delete the data from those files, the free space will not be automatically reclaimed by OS. We need to manually shrink the databases. So at this point, usually the database in total, it will be 10 plus 7.1. So totally the DB size would be, it will show as 17 GB. But inside this 17 GB, the actual data was used around 8.1 GB. And remaining 9 GB is free. So if you think that, okay, 9 GB is no more required for database, then what we do is we go and shrink the database so that the 9 GB space, we give it back to OS. Guys, are you following me? Any questions or confusions? We need to understand this recovery models because it makes us to decide what backups we need to take. So if your recovery model is full, if your recovery model is full for any database, then you can take all types of backups. There are 3 to 4 types of backups available in SQL Server. So if your database is in full recovery model, you can take all types of backups. And the second type is the bulk logged. If you set your recovery model of a database to bulk logged as it named, it will store each and every information that is happening on the database except select. If you read, write, it's almost act as a full recovery model. So bulk log recovery model is almost equal to the full recovery model except when you run bulk commands, the BCP commands, the bulk insert commands. During that time, the data will be minimally logged in your LDF file. I can give an example. Let's say you have a database. One database you have in full recovery model and the other database you have in bulk logged recovery model. Now, let me write over here. I have got 1 DB with full recovery model property and have got second DB with bulk log recovery model. Now the behavior.
Hi, Vishnu, I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
See, as you said, if a user inserted a 5 GB of data in the
Mhm,
database,
mhm.
then the data will get stored in both the file, LDF and MDF file.
Yes, if the recovery model is full.
Okay. So if in case any data loss has happened,
Mhm.
so the data will store at the LDF file
Yeah, data is
as
still
well as
available.
MDF.
LDF, the data is still available in your LDF file and MDF file. And again, it depends upon whether you have taken the log backup or not. If you have taken a log backup just before the
Mhm,
crash, then the
mhm,
data will not be available in the LDF file, but you are good at the backup. You took the log backup, right? So you should be all right.
mhm,
So if you have not taken a log backup, then yes,
mhm.
still the data is available in the LDF file.
But it will not be available in MDF file
No, it's still available, but you
in
cannot
both.
take. Yeah. What I mean to say is the data is still available in the MDF file and as well as in LDF file. But if you want to back up the data within the MDF file, then
Mm,
you have to perform a complete backup. Let's say your database is around 100 GB, then you have to
okay.
back up that 100 GB of data. So it might take around 2 hours or somewhere to back up the 100 GB of data. But the data inside your log file, if you configure your log backups to run very frequently, then it
Mhm,
just backs up the changes that were happened within the log file. In this scenario, I said user inserted, let's assume initially my MDF file is 500 GB. Okay.
mhm.
Now later user inserted 5 GB of data in this database. So the MDF file would go around 505 GB. Okay, and LDF file still will be 5.1 GB. So now tell me in this scenario, what would be the easy way? What would be the quick way? If I take a complete full backup, then it gonna back up my MDF file and as well as the LDF file. So in total, it will be 510 GB and it gonna take at least 3 to 4 hours to back up the database And at the same time, if I configure the log backups to run, then it only take the backup of the LDF. That is, it takes the backup of 5 GB. So it could finish within 5 minutes or 10 minutes of time.
So you mean to say that if the backup is happening frequently,
Mhm,
if in case the data recovery loss happen this within a hour,
mhm.
so we can take the log backup. That's LDF. You mean to say
Right,
that?
right.
Okay. Okay, fine. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we'll see more when we are discussing about the backup topics. I'm just concentrating on recovery models. What would be the behavior of the database with the options we select for recovery models? And going back to our scenario is like I have database. I'm just trying to make you understand what's the difference between the full and bulk log recovery model. And at one point I said both act as same, but there's a one major difference is about the bulk commands. So have got a database with the full recovery model, and assume this database is around 100 GB. So 100 GB means MDF file, I assume it's around 95 GB, and LDF file is around 5 GB. And I would take same scenario for this bulk log recovery model. Let's assume this is a consistent state now. And at this point, if you do some inserts or updates by normal T-SQL commands, the behavior would be the same. It will write each and every transaction inside your LDF file. If you insert 10 rows, those 10 rows information will be initially recorded in the LDF file, and once your transaction gets succeeded, then those 10 rows will be flashed permanently and saved in your MDF file. That should be fine for all other queries. But when any bulk commands ran, let's assume there were bulk insert commands is nothing but when you do data import from your flat file, we say from notepad file or from Excel file, from huge amount of data, when you do some imports and exports. Let's say a user is exporting 10 GB of data from .csv file onto the database. I mention it as data load. So now the overall size of the database, so first let us make it MDF file, would grow around 105 GB, and your LDF file will go up to 15 GB. So I hope you understand this concept. But coming back to I need to mention data load with bulk commands. And the same way here, the same user, he inserted 10 GB of data with bulk commands. As this database is in bulk logged recovery model, the MDF file obviously grow to 1.5 GB, but the LDF file will be around 5 GB, 5.01 GB. So the change what you notice here is the LDF file is not growing. That is a benefit you want to get when you keep your recovery model in bulk logged. So when you keep your database in bulk log recovery model, so whatever the bulk commands ran, that will be logged very minimal. So in this case, a user is inserting some millions of data inside your database. So during that time, as my database is in bulk log recovery model, so in LDF file, it writes in single line saying that, yeah, 10,000 million rows have been inserted in this table. That's it. But in full recovery model, it writes each and every row, those 10,000 million rows in the log file. So that is a major difference. And when we go for bulk logged, we understand when do we go for full recovery model. It is if the database is a production. For all the production databases, the recovery model will be full, and for all the critical databases, we keep the recovery model as full. But this bulk log recovery model we recommend for staging databases, where every day you get a new data onto the database, and from there you do some normalization and push the data to the production. So in that case, you can keep your database in bulk logged recovery model. And one more point is, if your database is in full recovery model, then point in time recovery is possible. Point in time recovery mean to a certain point. Let's assume the database is crashed at 5:40 p.m. The point in time recovery is nothing but if you are capable of restoring the database up to the point just before the crash. So if you are able to recover the database up to 5 hours 39 minutes 30 seconds, then that is a point in time recovery. So that is possible with full recovery model. So that is the reason we go with full recovery model for production databases. So in case of disaster happens, we still have an option to recover the database to a point in time. But the condition is you need to take regular log backups. So that is a one case. And whereas in bulk recovery model, the point in time is still possible, but point in time is still possible. But if there were any bulk commands ran during the time, will be lost. So point in time recovery is still possible with the bulk log recovery model because it acts as similarly as the full recovery model for all other transactions except bulk commands. So if there are any bulk commands ran at 5:20 p.m., then you will not be in a position to restore your database to a point in time. So bulk log recovery model best suits for staging database for ETL processes, for extraction, transformation, and loading. If you want to, if you have a process of loading some millions of data into your database every day, then people often choose bulk log recovery model. Or else, if it is a bulk log recovery model, then the LDF file will spike up and fill up your drive space. And the third type is a simple recovery model. The name as it sounds, it's simple. If your database is in simple recovery model, when you do some insertions or updations or deletions, when you run some transactions on the database, by keeping your database in simple recovery model, although it writes all the information in LDF file, once the transaction commits, the data will be cleared from your LDF file. I repeat it again. If you keep your database in simple recovery model, and let's say a user ran a query to insert 2 GB of data in that table. So initially those 2 GB of data will be written into the LDF file, and once the transaction committed successfully, then the 2 GB data will be flushed to the MDF file, and whatever the data in the LDF file will be removed. So SQL Server automatically removes the committed transactions from your LDF file. So that is the reason you cannot have a point in time recovery and you cannot have a log backups. So for simple recovery model, as SQL Server automatically clears the data from the LDF, you cannot take log backups. If log backups are not there, then no point in time. Point in time can only be possible if you take a log backups. So when you set your database into simple recovery model, you don't have option to take log backups. If no log backups, then there is no point of point in time recovery. And for what databases we keep recovery model as simple? The answer is for development databases, for UAT databases, and for the databases that are not at all critical. We don't usually keep our dev databases or UAT databases in full recovery model. If you keep them in full recovery model, it's nothing but you are taking overhead, because just keeping the database in full recovery model doesn't meet the requirements. Having said that, if the database is in full recovery model, it obviously grow the LDF file, and at some point if you don't notice it, it's gonna fill up your drive. So we need to regularly take log backups. So it makes sense for us to do in production, but for UAT it's not required. You can still keep the database in simple recovery model because no one bothers about dev or the UAT databases unless it is very critical. So any questions? Any questions about the recovery models? Guys, please let me know if you have any questions or confusion, because we need to make ourselves very clear with these recovery models. And don't hesitate of asking questions. Please make yourself clear at this point, so that once we start our backups obviously depends upon these recovery models.
Vishu.
Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the log recovery model. As you said, if we insert any bulk command up to 10 GB of data.
It's not specific 10 GB. I just gave an example.
Yeah, just an example as you given.
Okay.
But it will not calculate the LDF file will be only 5 GB. Then where will the 10 GB data will be there?
See, once the
If I want,
yeah, please complete your question.
yeah, if the data recover, if the data is lost, disaster happen.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to take a backup, then I have to take a backup from the MDF file. That it means 105 GB have to take a backup.
No, if the database crash, you cannot take a backup of the MDF. It won't allow you to take a backup. There's only option
Then,
is there's a possibility you can take a log backup.
okay, but the transaction which happened, it is not mentioning there, no? The MDF file is showing the same, which
Yeah,
was earlier 5 GB.
yeah, that's what I mentioned at next point is like point in time is possible, but if there are any bulk commands run, the data will be lost. So for your question, once we insert 10 GB of data, and once the data being committed successfully, in LDF file, it only writes a single line saying that 10 GB of data written into this so-and-so table. So if you want to back up that LDF file, you won't get any information. It just says so-and-so data has been inserted, but you won't get actual data. And again, when your database crash, you cannot take backup of your MDF file. And it makes sense when we discuss about the backups. And in SQL, we won't take backups of MDF file. We call it as a full backup, which backups MDF and LDF. And the other backup is log backup, which only take the data from the log files. Yeah, obviously the full recovery model is good, but for production, that is the reason for all production databases, we keep the recovery model as full because we have an option of taking log backups that gives an ability to recover the database in point in time. So any more questions? Venkat, Kaushik, Ishwar. And one other thing is how to change the recovery model of a database. Let's say when I have created this database, you can see here, let me open it again. I can go to the properties of this database, then options. It says the database is in full recovery model. If you think that, okay, by keeping the recovery model of this database full, my LDF file is growing huge. So as I said, why don't I change it to simple and then click OK. It will accept, but there are certain things we need to take care of. As soon as you change the recovery model from full to simple, then what all the data that is in the LDF file till now will be cleared. So please make yourself very clear when you are trying to change the recovery models. And the other thing is, maybe the database is in full recovery model. These are all interview questions I'm saying. If you get a question saying that do you change your recovery models often, you can say yes, I can change it, but whenever you change the recovery models, it is required for you to take full database backup. Please make a note of this. Whenever you change the recovery models, it is required to take a full database backup. It is because when the database is in full recovery model, and I might have scheduled daily full backup to run, and for every 30 minutes the log backup. Okay, so the log backups runs on a sequence number, which we call it as a LSN. It's log sequence number. So the log backups runs with a sequence number. So when we change this recovery model from full to bulk logged or full to simple, and even let's say I change from full to simple and then click OK, and immediately within a second you realized and you change it back. You change from simple to full again and then you click OK. Still, the upcoming log backups will start getting failed. The upcoming log backups will fail even though you swap back all the properties of recovery model. Still you notice the log backups will fail. It is because at the time you change the recovery model from full to simple, within that second the data within the LDF file will be cleared and the LSN values will be reset. So when the next log backup comes after 30 minutes, it thinks someone has or something got changed in this database. It couldn't find the sequence numbers there. So that is the reason the log backups will start getting failed. So when you get a question from interviewer, yes Mani, I will repeat it again. Let's say you have a database with full recovery model and it is up and running for a long time. And maybe accidentally or knowingly, if you change that recovery model from full to simple. Okay, at the time you change from full to simple and click OK there, the LSN, the log sequence numbers within the log file will be cleared. The data within the LDF file will be cleared. So the next upcoming log backups will start failing. It is because the LSN, it gives an error message that the LSN values are mismatch. So when you swap the recovery models, it is always advised to take full backup. So you might get a question from interviewer like you have a database with a full recovery model and someone has changed the database from full to simple and immediately they reverted back. Now, what is the impact on your database backups? The answer is the upcoming log backups will start getting failed. I will show you in demo in our next class when we discuss about the backups. Please remind me this point. We'll try to demonstrate the same case and we can see the results. But for now, please remember, it is not advised to change the recovery models, but if it really required to change the recovery models, you need to take a full database backup. The full database backup actually resets the LSN. So from there onwards, the log backups again start running. So either you can use GUI to change the recovery models, or you can use a command called alter database name, set recovery. Either you can use full or simple or bulk logged. So I will hold off here. The next topic is a backup, so we do it on tomorrow. It might make you a bit confused, the namings, like the recovery model does have full, bulk logged, simple, and we do have similar terminology in backups. Maybe it could be a bit difficult for you to remember these things, but once you start practicing, you shouldn't find any difficulties. So any questions before I close this call? Okay, yes, thank you very much. We'll be back tomorrow.
Vishu.
Yes, Dinesh.
See, as soon as the recording happens, please requesting you to send the recording, the session earlier. If today's happens, then you can send it by tonight only. It will be good for us,
hopefully,
to.
Yeah, I understand, because once the recording session finishes here, I need to convert it because it will be in different format. So I need to convert that recording session into MP4 so that you can play it at your side. So it does take some time for the conversion. So hopefully I will make it available by end of the day.
Okay, fine. Thank you so much.
Yeah.